11:30 a.m., December 22, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. 4 German officers emerged through the snow under a white flag. Behind them, 7 divisions, 45,000 troops, hundreds of panzers, artillery that has pounded this town into rubble for 6 days straight. Inside a freezing cellar, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe holds their ultimatum in frost-cracked hands. Around him, wounded paratroopers lean against stone walls too cold to shiver, too exhausted to sleep. Outside, the ring tightens: no supplies, no reinforcements, no way out. The German message is precise: surrender now or be annihilated. Every military academy teaches the same lesson. When surrounded 3-1 with no ammunition, no air support, and no hope of relief, you negotiate terms. You save your men. You accept reality. McAuliffe reads the ultimatum twice, then writes one word: nuts. The reply that should doom 15,000 Americans surrounded by 45,000 Germans instead ignites something the Germans cannot comprehend, a doctrine that transforms encirclement into attack desperation, into offensive action, surrounded defenders into the most dangerous force on the battlefield. This crossroads decides whether Germany splits the Allied front and reaches Antwerp, reversing the war's momentum, whether the largest American ground battle in Europe ends in catastrophe or legend, and the man holding this town just told superior forces to go to hell. What turns encirclement into counterattack when every textbook says defend? What makes soldiers counterattack when every rational calculation says they're already dead? 6 days earlier, hell arrives in the forest. December 16, 1944. 05:30 hours. The Ardennes explodes. Germany launches Operation Watch on the Rhine, 250,000 men, 600 panzers, 1,800 artillery pieces smashing through fog-blind American lines. It's Hitler's final roll of the dice: split the Allied armies, seize Antwerp, force a negotiated peace before the Reich collapses. 3 German armies pour through a 60-mile gap. Villages vanish under artillery fire. Green American divisions disintegrate. Roads clog with refugees and retreating troops. At the center of this maelstrom sits Bastogne. 7 roads converge here like arteries feeding a heart. Control this town and German armor flows west toward the Meuse River and beyond. Lose it and 300 panzers bogged down in forest trails too narrow for maneuver. Bastogne is everything. December 18th. The 101st Airborne Division. The Screaming Eagles rolls toward Bastogne in open trucks. They were supposed to be resting in France after 2 months of continuous combat. Instead, they're racing toward encirclement. No winter uniforms, no cold weather gear. Men shiver in summer jackets, watching their breath freeze in the night air. Some joke nervously. Most stay silent, knowing what's coming. They link with Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division. 3 battered teams of Shermans and armored infantry already bleeding from delaying actions. Tank commanders report Tigers on every approach, fuel running low, ammunition lower. December 20th. The ring closes. Volks Grenadiers attack from the north, waves of gray figures emerging from tree lines. Panzer Lehr hammers from the south, their Mark IVs grinding through snow toward American positions. The 26th Volks Grenadier Division seals the east. 7 German divisions, over 45,000 troops, encircle fewer than 15,000 Americans. The math is brutal. 3-1 infantry, 4-1 artillery, armor advantage incalculable. Artillery pounds the perimeter every hour, methodical and merciless. The frozen ground amplifies each impact, shockwaves traveling through earth into bones. Scouts report Tiger tanks prowling the forest perimeter, engines growling like predators, circling wounded prey. Inside Bastogne, the nightmare takes shape. Medics work by candlelight, sawing through frozen boots to reach blackened feet. Frostbite claims toes, then feet, then legs. The screams never stop. Morphine runs dangerously low. Doctors make choices no human should make: who gets painkillers, who suffers through amputation with nothing but leather to bite. Quartermasters ration ammunition by the round. Each rifleman gets 8 bullets. Machine gunners get 1 belt. When it's gone, fight with bayonets or die. Food disappears. Men scrape frozen sea rations from cans, the grease barely melting in their mouths. Water freezes in canteens. Soldiers melt snow with body heat, drinking their own warmth to stay alive. Forward observers huddle in foxholes calling artillery corrections, with German voices crackling on nearby radio frequencies. The enemy is close enough to hear American transmissions, close enough to smell cooking fires, close enough to throw grenades into perimeter positions. Every textbook, every manual, every lesson from military history delivers the same verdict when surrounded by superior forces with no supplies and no air support. You defend. You conserve ammunition. You wait for relief. You do not attack. But American doctrine, rebuilt from the ashes of World War I by General George C. Marshall, rejects this logic entirely. Marshall watched an entire generation die in trenches paralyzed by defensive thinking. After the armistice, he tore apart American tactical philosophy and rebuilt it from nothing. His radical principle: push authority down to the smallest unit. Train every soldier to seize initiative. Make counterattack the default response to any threat, even especially when surrounded. It's a revolutionary concept that horrifies European military theorists. British doctrine emphasizes holding ground at all costs. Soviet doctrine relies on mass and attrition. German doctrine prizes maneuver but demands orders flow from above. American doctrine expects a surrounded sergeant to attack without waiting for permission. Initiative over coordination. Speed over safety. Aggression over survival. Marshall's reforms create something unprecedented: an army that refuses to think defensively, where junior officers and NCOs make tactical decisions faster than enemy commanders can react, where being surrounded triggers offensive action instead of defensive paralysis. Inside Bastonia's frozen perimeter, that doctrine is about to face its ultimate test. The question burning in every foxhole isn't whether they'll survive, it's whether flesh and will can hold when steel runs out. December 20th, the vice tightens from every direction. Marvy, southeast of Bastogne. Euro 6, 15 hours. Panzer Grenadiers materialize from the morning mist like ghosts, 200 strong, pushing hard into the village. Team O'Hara's Shermans have minutes to react, stay hidden, and lose the position or charge and buy time with blood. Commander decides in seconds. Engines roar to life. 3 Shermans surge from concealed positions, abandoning cover for shock value. Tracks churn frozen earth. The gamble is insane, trading mobility for a few precious hours. Panzerfausts streak through fog. The first Sherman erupts in orange flame turrets spinning through the air like a coin toss. Crew burns inside their screams, cut short as ammunition cooks off in a chain of explosions that shakes windows 3 blocks away. The other Shermans keep firing, point blank. 75mm rounds ripping through German infantry at ranges where you can see faces. Panic spreads. The enemy breaks. Cost 3 tanks, 15 men. Gain 6 hours before the next assault. Noville, north of the perimeter. U-08, 40 hours. The 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment clings to a salient the Germans want erased. Fog turns combat into acoustic nightmare. You hear death before you see it. Track clatter, rifle crack, screams that echo through frozen trees and don't stop. Paratroopers fix bayonets with hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Their breath comes in ragged gasps, lungs burning from exertion and frozen air. An order ripples down the line: counterattack. They surge forward through blinding snow boots, crunching on ice slick with blood. Close quarters brutality: bayonets finding soft flesh between ribs, entrenching tools caving in skulls, hands too numb to feel the work they're doing. They retake the crossroads. Men collapse against walls, sucking air that feels like broken glass in their throats. German artillery responds an hour later. The earth erupts. Entire foxholes vanish, tons of frozen soil swallowing squads whole. When survivors dig frantically for their brothers, they find men suffocated in collapsed trenches, mouths still open in silent screams, hands clawing at dirt they couldn't escape. December 21st. The collapse accelerates. Ammunition drops below combat minimums. Company commanders stare at numbers that don't work: 8 rounds per rifleman, 1 belt per machine gun, 3 shells per mortar tube. Officers make impossible calculations: save ammo for the next attack, or use it now and have nothing for tomorrow. Rifle bolts freeze shut in the sub-zero cold. Desperate men urinate on metal to thaw firing mechanisms, a trick learned the hard way past, whisper to whisper through frozen lines. The acrid smell mixes with cordite and gangrene. Soldiers pry boots off corpses, whispering apologies to the dead who no longer need them. Some boots still hold warmth. Most are frozen solid feet still inside. Radio operators intercept German communications, a coordinated assault at dawn. 7 divisions moving simultaneously. Every approach covered. The kill shot is coming. 60 miles south, General George S. Patton receives the order that will define his career: save Bastogne. He attempts the impossible. Third Army, 90,000 men, 18,000 vehicles, pivots 90 degrees north in 66 hours. A maneuver that peacetime doctrine says takes 2 weeks. Patton compresses it into 3 days through sheer force of will and absolute disregard for logistics textbooks. His 4th Armored Division crawls forward on roads more ice than asphalt. Mines detonate under lead tanks. Ambushes erupt from tree lines. The column bleeds vehicles and men with every mile, but never stops moving. Tank commanders lose crews, lose friends, but maintain momentum because stopping means Bastogne dies. Inside the perimeter, hell becomes routine. The 969th Field Artillery Battalion fires every gun until barrels glow cherry red in the darkness, metal screaming from heat stress. Gun crews work with burned hands wrapped in rags, loading shells by touch because they can't see through the smoke and steam. Forward observers call fire missions within 200 yards of American positions danger-close barrages that violate every safety protocol. Artillery slams into advancing Germans and American troops alike. Men die from their own shrapnel, eardrums rupture from blast waves. Organs bruise inside rib cages. Company commanders accept the math, lose 3 men to friendly fire, save 30 from German assault. The wounded pile up faster than medics can treat them. Aid stations overflow. Churches become hospitals. Cellars become morgues. The smell gangrene, diesel cordite death becomes impossible to escape. December 22nd. Dawn. A glider infantry patrol receives intelligence German supply convoy moving through Cambrai, 3 miles out, lightly guarded. It's a suicide mission, 13 men against 50 in broad daylight with no support. They go anyway. The ambush lasts 90 seconds. Brutal close quarters fighting, grenades into truck cabs, rifle fire at arm's length bayonets when ammunition runs dry. Germans die at their steering wheels. American boys die in the snow beside them. 7 paratroopers survive. They steal 40 jerry cans of precious fuel gasoline that will keep American half-tracks and Shermans running another 12 hours. They drag their wounded back through 2 miles of open snow, leaving red trails the Germans will follow come nightfall. But the fuel reaches Bastogne. McAuliffe's headquarters shakes under near misses, each impact closer than the last. Stone dust falls from the ceiling in curtains. Officers wipe grit from maps with shaking hands, recalculating defensive positions that keep shrinking. The town fills with bodies too frozen to bury. They stack them behind aid stations like cordwood, American, German, civilian, all equal in death. Frozen limbs snap when moved. Eyes stay open, staring at nothing. Wounded men lie in stables, churches, cellars, anywhere with 4 walls and roof. Medics move between them by lantern light, making triage decisions that will haunt them forever. This man lives. That man dies. No morphine left for either. The smell of gangrene thickens. Black tissue spreads up limbs despite amputation. Infection kills as surely as bullets. Each hour deepens the arithmetic of despair. 15,000 defenders, 45,000 attackers, ammunition for maybe 2 more days. food for one, medical supplies exhausted. Every calculation points to the same conclusion: surrender or die. Then 4 German officers appear under a white flag and everything changes. The battle transforms into chess played with human pieces on a board made of ice and blood. American defense shouldn't work. Not on paper. Not by any rational military calculation. But doctrine doesn't care about numbers. It cares about tempo. Team O'Hara's Shermans become the linchpin. They occupy hull-down positions, turrets exposed hulls protected by terrain, fixing German panzers in place. It's psychological warfare with steel. The Shermans can't penetrate Tiger frontal armor at range, so they don't try. They force the enemy to maneuver to expose vulnerable rear plating, and that's when the trap springs. Paratroopers with bazookas crawl through snow breath, held hearts hammering. They get within 20 yards, close enough to see rivets on panzer plate, close enough to smell diesel exhaust. One shot. The bazooka's backblast gives away position. Fire and move or die. It's choreography written in blood and rehearsed under fire. The Germans expect American armor to fight American armor. Instead, they face combined arms improvisation that defies their tactical doctrine tanks, fixing infantry flanking every position, supporting overlapping fields of fire. Forward observers of the 969th Field Artillery Battalion become the invisible hand of death. They shift fire missions in minutes instead of hours, adjusting strikes while shells are still in the air. Radio calls crackle. Drop 100 left, 50 fire for effect. Explosions walk across German assault formations with mechanical precision. Then the truly insane requests come through danger close fire missions. Artillery strikes within 200 yards of American positions. Blast waves that shatter windows in friendly held buildings. Shrapnel that doesn't discriminate between uniform colors. Forward observers watch their own men die from friendly artillery and call corrections for the next volley anyway. Company commanders accept casualties from their own guns because the alternative is annihilation from German infantry. It's cold mathematics: lose 3 to shrapnel, save 30 from assault. Battalion surgeons treat American boys perforated by American steel and say nothing because everyone understands the trade. Eardrums rupture from overpressure. Men bleed from noses and ears. Organs bruise inside rib cages from blast concussion. But the line holds. Battalion commanders override every peacetime regulation, every safety protocol, every lesson from Staff College that prioritizes caution over speed. A lieutenant at Noville sees a gap forming in the defensive line, sees it before his company commander, before battalion HQ, before anyone with authority to act. He diverts a half-track platoon without permission, without orders, on pure tactical instinct. The gamble works. German infantry pours into what should be an open breach and hits armor and machine guns instead. The near route becomes stalemate. The lieutenant, 23 years old, commissioned 8 months ago, saves 200 men with a decision that violates his direct orders. He dies from a sniper's bullet 10 minutes later before anyone can court-martial or commend him. This is Marshall's doctrine, made flesh authority pushed down to the lowest competent level, junior officers empowered to override senior commanders when they see what the map can't show. Speed prioritized over coordination. Action rewarded over asking permission. It's tactically brilliant and organizationally heretical. Every other army waits for orders. American doctrine expects surrounded units to make their own decisions and counterattack immediately. 60 miles south, Patton conducts a symphony of violence at Army-level scale. 3rd Army pivots north, 18,000 vehicles moving in synchronized chaos across frozen roads that weren't designed for peacetime traffic, let alone mechanized warfare. Tank destroyers advance in column formation, hunting Tigers from concealed positions. Each kill comes at calculated risk, one shot from ambush, then displaced before return fire arrives. Infantry secures flanks in brutal close quarters forest fighting. Engineers clear mines under direct fire, losing fingers to frostbite and hands to explosions. When one engineer dies defusing a teller mine, the next man in line takes his tools and keeps working. 4th Armored loses vehicles every mile, loses men every hour, but never loses momentum. Patton's command style violates every principle of modern staff management. He doesn't request, he demands. He doesn't suggest, he orders. Logistics officers tell him the fuel won't reach forward units. He tells them to requisition from other armies. When they explain proper channels, he picks up the phone and does it himself. Inside Bastogne, small unit leaders make decisions that ripple across the battlefield geometry like stones dropped in water. A sergeant commanding a mortar section sees German infantry massing for assault. His orders conserve ammunition. Instead, he reallocates his remaining tubes to cover a gap in the defensive line his company commander didn't know existed. Expends every shell in 6 minutes of sustained fire. The German attack collapses before it begins. 2 miles east, a captain shifts his entire company 200 yards left on tactical hunch. Something about the terrain doesn't match the intelligence reports. His radio operator questions the order. The captain ignores him. 30 minutes later, German assault troops emerge exactly where the company was positioned. Now they hit prepared defenses instead of thin coverage. The attack shatters against interlocking machine gun fire. These decisions, unauthorized, improvised, brilliant, happen hundreds of times across the perimeter. Lieutenants override captains. Sergeants ignore lieutenants. Every man acts on the doctrine drilled into them when in doubt attack. The cumulative effect is devastating. Germans expect surrounded Americans to consolidate, to pull back to shorter lines, to conserve resources for the inevitable final assault. Instead, they face nightly raids that destroy artillery positions, strong points that shift locations every 6 hours, counterattacks launched from positions that should be defending. German coordination falters under the weight of constant tactical surprise. Regimental commanders receive conflicting reports. Is the American perimeter contracting or expanding? Are they desperate or defiant? Why do they keep attacking when they should be dying? The timetable slips. Assault waves hit empty positions because Americans moved overnight. Artillery barrages waste shells on abandoned trenches. Panzer columns advance into kill zones that didn't exist on yesterday's maps. Confusion metastasizes through German command structure. Officers argue over intelligence. Battalions wait for orders that arrive too late. The siege that should tighten becomes a fluid nightmare where the surrounded enemy refuses to act surrounded. Initiative Marshall's core principle proves more powerful than numerical superiority. Inside frozen foxholes, American soldiers don't know they're making history. They know cold. They know hunger. They know the terror of counting bullets and finding too few. But they also know doctrine: when the enemy attacks, you counterattack harder. And that reflex ingrained through training and validated through blood keeps the ring from collapsing even as ammunition counts toward zero. McAuliffe's reply, "Nuts," spreads through the American lines like electricity through frozen wire. It reaches foxholes before official orders do. Paratroopers whisper it to each other in the darkness. Tank crews paint it on shell casings. Medics repeat it to wounded men who smile through morphine haze. It's not bravado. It's something far more dangerous. Permission. Permission to resist beyond what military logic allows. Permission to act when every textbook says, consolidate and defend. Permission to believe that surrounded does not mean defeated, that encirclement is not the end of the fight, but merely a change in its geometry. The message transforms psychology into action. That night, December 22nd, under cover of darkness so complete, men navigate by touch paratrooper squads, launch raids against German artillery positions. These aren't reconnaissance patrols. These are hunting parties. They crawl through snowdrifts, throats raw from cold faces blackened with charcoal. They seize observation posts in silent knife work, turning captured guns on panzer columns forming for dawn assaults. German artillery officers die at their own plotting tables, never seeing the shadows that kill them. A reconnaissance patrol from the 101st discovers something critical: a seam in the southern encirclement thinly held where German units rotated to prepare for the next push. It's a 2-mile gap covered only by pickets and patrols, a wound in the siege line. The information reaches Patton within hours through radio relay. He exploits it instantly. 4th Armored Division's Lead Task Force Combat Command Reserve under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams receives new orders. Forget the main roads. Forget the planned approach. Hit the seam. Hit it now. Hit it with everything. Abrams doesn't hesitate, doesn't request clarification, doesn't wait for detailed reconnaissance. He attacks. Sherman tanks tank destroyers, armored infantry. The entire task force pivots toward the coordinates and drives forward into the night. They hit German positions mid-movement, catching fuel trucks and half-tracks exposed on icy roads, crews dismounted vehicles dispersed for maintenance. It's massacre by moonlight. Shermans fire on the move 75mm rounds punching through thin-skinned vehicles. Fuel trucks explode in orange fireballs that turn night to day. German soldiers scramble for weapons for cover for their lives. Most don't make it. Abrams doesn't stop to consolidate the breakthrough, doesn't pause to count casualties or secure flanks. He pushes deeper into the gap, gambling that speed and violence will compensate for exposed flanks and lengthening supply lines. It's tactically insane and operationally brilliant. Behind him, the corridor widens under fire. Sherman's from Combat Command. A and Combat Command R converge on the breach like wolves to wounded prey. Tank destroyers take hull-down positions on high ground overlooking the approach, creating a gauntlet of interlocking fire. Infantry clears flanking woods in house-to-house brutality grenades, through windows automatic fire into cellars, bayonets for close quarters. Every building costs blood, every meter costs time. But the corridor expands. The dynamic inverts with shocking speed. German units find themselves suddenly facing American armor behind their positions, forces that shouldn't exist, attacks from directions that make no tactical sense. Radio discipline collapses into chaos. Commanders issue contradictory orders. Units withdraw to avoid encirclement, abandoning positions they've held for days. The surrounded become attackers. The besiegers face encirclement from their rear. German units find themselves trapped between Bastogne's defenders and Patton's spearhead, the hunters now hunted. German battalion commanders scramble to reorient forces, pulling troops from the Bastogne perimeter to seal the breach. But American tempo overwhelms their decision cycle. By the time orders reach forward units, the situation has already changed. What was a company-sized penetration becomes a battalion-sized corridor, becomes an entire armored division pouring through. Headquarters receives reports that contradict maps. Maps show encirclement. Reality shows American tanks 10 miles behind German lines. Officers trained in methodical staff procedures find themselves mentally paralyzed by tactical developments that outpace their ability to process. This is the forbidden move, not breakout, but break-in. Not the surrounded trying to escape, but relief forces exploiting the overextension inherent in any siege. The Germans committed everything to the ring around Bastogne, creating their own vulnerabilities in the process. And Marshall's doctrine decentralized aggressive immediate exploits those vulnerabilities faster than centralized German command can respond. Inside Bastogne, McAuliffe receives word of Patton's breakthrough. The corridor is forming. Relief is measured in hours, not days, but the perimeter still bleeds. German commanders, realizing the siege is failing, order desperate assaults, use it or lose it, attacks designed to take Bastogne before it can be relieved. Artillery intensifies. Infantry attacks resume with suicidal determination. The defenders face one final test: hold long enough for relief to arrive. Every minute matters. Every position counts. Men who thought they were fighting to delay now fight to survive just a few more hours. The ring doesn't break cleanly. It bends, twists, and transforms into something no military theorist predicted: a siege collapsing inward on the besiegers themselves. 1650 hours, December 26, 1944. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' lead tank Cobra King grinds through snow and wreckage into Bastogne's southern perimeter. Its engine roars like thunder. Exhaust smoke billows in the frozen air. Paratroopers emerge from foxholes, eyes red-rimmed, faces blackened with frostbite and cordite. They wave with hands wrapped in bloody bandages. Some collapse from exhaustion and relief. Medics rush forward shouting for stretchers. But the fight isn't over. German forces still surround 3/4 of the town. Panzers duel Shermans at ranges measured in seconds, not meters. High-velocity rounds punch through armor with sounds like hammer strikes on anvils, igniting ammunition and fuel. Crews bail from burning hulls into snow that hisses and steams, rolling to extinguish flames, eating through uniforms. Paratroopers surge forward, reclaiming ground lost in earlier assaults. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment clears champs under mortar fire, moving from house to house, cellar to cellar. The 506th holds Foy against a Panzer counterattack, bazookas, and determination against steel. A sergeant named Donald Malarkey fires his last rocket at 20 yards, watches the Panzer brew up, then collapses against a wall and weeps. Artillery batters German flanks until the forest glows red through the storm. Trees explode into splinters, snow vaporizes into steam. The earth itself seems to scream. The corridor widens. More Shermans pour in tracks, throwing up ice and mud. Supplies follow ammunition, medical equipment, winter clothing that men strip from crates with shaking hands. Wounded evacuate south on tanks and half-tracks replaced by fresh infantry, who stare in shock at the walking skeletons they're relieving. German coordination fractures like ice under pressure. Units withdraw to avoid encirclement, abandoning equipment too damaged or fuel-starved to move. The offensive momentum dies in the snow, buried alongside thousands of bodies from both sides. Bastogne is alive. The crossroads holds. Small unit initiative, the core of American doctrine, overwhelms German coordination. Every sergeant, every lieutenant acts without waiting for orders. They exploit fleeting advantages, turning defensive positions into launching points for counterstrikes. They refuse to yield what they've purchased with blood. The impossible becomes history. December 27, 1944. The German ring collapses entirely. The 101st Airborne Division, battered and depleted, remains combat effective. Patton's corridor expands into a salient. Supplies pour in by truck and air C-47s, dropping parachute bundles that bloom like flowers against gray sky. Medics treat frostbite, shrapnel wounds, exhaustion by lantern light in reclaimed cellars. They amputate limbs, blackened beyond saving, knowing these men will never jump again. Troops rotate forward to press the attack, driving back German units that days earlier surrounded them. Roles reverse with savage irony, the besieged become pursuers. The cost is staggering. The 101st suffers over 2,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing. Combat Command B loses half its armor, dozens of Shermans reduced to burned-out hulls. Entire companies reduced to squad strength. The 506th Easy Company enters Bastogne with 139 men. Only 63 walk out. But Bastogne holds. The German Ardennes offensive, the last major strike in the West, fractures against this single crossroads. Panzer divisions burn fuel and ammunition for no strategic gain. Infantry divisions bleed strength in attacks that achieve nothing but casualty lists. The cream of Germany's remaining armored force dies in Belgian snow for roads they'll never control. By January 1945, the bulge is erased. German forces retreat east, depleted and demoralized. Soldiers who survived Bastogne will remember the Americans who counterattacked from encirclement, an act that seems insane until you understand the doctrine behind it. The gamble fails. The war accelerates toward its conclusion. 15,000 men change the outcome of a campaign designed to reverse the course of the war. The defense of Bastogne validates Marshall's doctrine in the crucible of modern mechanized warfare. Immediate counterattack, decentralized initiative, small unit aggression even under encirclement. These principles born from World War I's lessons become foundational to American ground combat through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The Battle of the Bulge drains Germany's last armored reserves fuel ammunition veteran crews, accelerating the collapse of the Western Front. Historians mark Bastogne as the turning point, the moment when strategic initiative passes permanently to the Allies. German commanders will later admit that the failure to take this single crossroads doomed the entire offensive. Tank warfare in difficult terrain gains new understanding. Combined arms coordination under degraded communications becomes doctrine. Future American armor. M46. Patton M47. M48 traces design lineage to lessons learned in these frozen forests. Engineers study how Shermans fought tigers at disadvantage and survived through teamwork and aggression. The word nuts enters global military culture as the symbol of ground force resilience, taught in staff colleges from West Point to Sandhurst as the embodiment of moral courage under impossible odds. It's printed on division patches, stamped on commemorative coins, whispered by soldiers facing their own impossible moments. McAuliffe's reply is studied not as rhetoric but as operational philosophy. The refusal to accept defeat reshapes battlefield reality. Surrender was militarily rational, resistance was doctrinally sound, and the Screaming Eagles earned their legend not through victory alone, but through the choice to fight when surrounded. The American doctrine of immediate counterattack, refusing to yield initiative even when encircled, proves decisive. While other armies entrench and wait for relief, American forces strike back, disrupting enemy coordination and creating opportunities from desperation. It becomes the signature that distinguishes American ground forces from every other military tradition. Soviet armies encircled at Stalingrad held passively until relieved. British forces at Tobruk defended brilliantly but rarely counterattacked. German units at Stalingrad and later in Normandy fought defensively when surrounded. Only American doctrine demands that surrounded units attack. This becomes the signature of American ground warfare for generations. In the silent snow, where paratroopers once curled around rifles for warmth, history offers its quiet lesson. Steel alone cannot hold a crossroads. Numbers alone cannot guarantee victory. Even firepower, overwhelming and relentless, breaks against the human decision to resist. It is the choice to counterstrike against fear, against arithmetic, against the logic of surrender that determines the fate of armies and the memory of generations. Bastogne stands as proof that doctrine, when forged from hard lessons and tested by ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances, becomes something more than tactics. It becomes the difference between a town lost and a war won. The paratroopers who held this ground weren't superhuman. They were cold, hungry, terrified men who chose action over paralysis, initiative over orders, counterattack over surrender. They embodied a radical idea that small units led by competent leaders can shape strategic outcomes, that surrounded does not mean defeated, that the initiative belongs to whoever seizes it regardless of the tactical situation. Marshall's reforms proved their worth in frozen Belgian forests, validating a doctrine that will echo through American military culture for the rest of the century and beyond. And in that frozen forest, 15,000 soldiers proved that encirclement is not the end, it is merely the beginning of the counterattack. If you found meaning in the choices made in that frozen crossroads, explore how other surrounded forces throughout history turned desperation into defiance. The archives hold more stories of impossible stands that changed everything.